Okay, here we have the episode Power Play. This is one of those that I personally remember in a very what the heck is going on this time way. Why? Because this is an episode that plays off the idea of space is weird and dangerous. And yeah, okay, if you're wanting to avoid spoilers for the episode, you're in the wrong YouTube channel. Anyways, I'm going to skip straight to the spoilers. One, like it says here, alien entities take over the. Well, this says take over the minds, but it's more like they use their bodies as puppets. They don't really um, mess with their minds. They just physically force them to do things. The plot's simple. The Enterprise receives a distress call from a ship that shouldn't exist. The USS Essex, which was last known to have been under the command of Captain Bryce Schumar. Here's the thing. The Essex was last seen in 2167. For reference, this episode takes place in 2368. 200 years later. So, that in mind, this tells us a lot about the fact that they're receiving a distress call from the Essex. It's not real. Okay, it's a real distress call, but what it is that the beings that are making the distress call aren't the crew of the Essex. They're energy entities that have somehow figured out how to use what's left of the Essex as a method of calling for help. See, they've figured out that the Federation doesn't know what they are. So they are just going to pretend to be Starfleet officers. They have the wreck of the Essex, and they're just going to tell people like, "Oh, yeah, we're the crew of the Essex, and we want to go back to Earth." But obviously, that is a lie, but whatevs. Now, this is something has a strange, very, very strange plot twist. Because, one, where did the Essex crash? Well, it was at the Class M moon of Mabu 6. And the non-corporeal entities that were exiled to Mabu 6 were attempting to hijack it, and then it crashed, and stuff happened. Because the electromagnetic storms that acted as a fence around this moon were something it couldn't overcome. Now, 200 years later, the entities who had inadvertently caused it to crash the first time had figured out how to make the distress call work. Now, one thing that's noteworthy here is that these entities know a lot about Starfleet and starships. But this is because they've had 200 years to study the Essex. What exactly they've been doing with it, we don't ever get to find out. But the amount that they learn about Starfleet protocols is actually pretty impressive. Obviously, it's stuff that's 200 years out of date by the time that the crew of the Enterprise D finds the remains of the USS Essex, but it is genuine information and something that the entities who were trying to puppet everyone were genuinely able to use. Which makes the imposter syndrome that they have for this quite effective, because these alien entities are actually, you know, they know how Starfleet works on the inside, so they're able to properly imitate things. Their motives don't match, though. And it's the fact that their motives that don't match that causes Picard to disbelieve their story about being the actual crew of the Essex. Because, let's face it, if they're the actual crew of the Essex, why don't they just, start by saying, "Hi, please help"? They don't. And that was Picard's first clue that they were lying. Which, of course, results in them eventually finding out what the real story is. Now, yeah, this guy, we don't really, he gets talked about a lot because he was the captain of the Essex when it crashed. But, he's been dead for 200 years, so, Uxmal. These entities are beings from the solar system Uxmal. What we know about it is very, very limited. Like, all we know is that it's something that had a humanoid civilization in it, seemingly because of the fact that the beings that were encountered by the crew of the Enterprise seemed familiar with the concept of humanoids. And we don't really get a whole much else. Like, the people of Uxmal had come up with a way of separating someone's mind from their body and taking the energy pattern that represents someone's consciousness, pulling it out of their body and throwing it into space. Thing is, they don't really give us a whole lot of information about how this happens, when this was done. All we know about it is that it's been centuries that this has been going on. I mean, like, the Essex encountering Mabu that was 200 years ago. The beings that had been dumped on Mabu had been there for, well, supposedly, some of them had been there since the 1900s. So by the time Picard showed up, like 400 or 500 years. That is quite a lot. And that's one of the things about this episode where you go like, hang on, wait a second. Because the implications of this are rather bizarre. One, this method of separating someone's mind from their body is similar to things that we've seen in Star Trek before. Like, the original series had an episode where people had their minds separated from their bodies as a way of prolonging their lifespan so that they would more or less live on in digital form after their physical bodies had died. I mean, it worked. In that case, it was done solely with people who had what were more or less good intentions, albeit highly, what's the best way to put this? Greedy. Yeah, let's just go with highly greedy intentions, but otherwise honorable. And in this case, though, it was solely people who were criminals who were more or less being condemned to death. The logic behind this is baffling My personal best guess is that whoever was doing this was doing it just to be sadistic. Why on earth someone would have a punishment system this sadistic, I have no idea. And it makes you question the Uxmal civilization. Because, why would you want to make criminals effectively immortal and then condemn them to an immortal existence that's comprised primarily of suffering? And that suffering is actually the weakness of said disembodied spirits, though, is that people who are in the process of feeling pain, I mean, it needs to be relatively significant pain, mind you, not minor inconvenient pain, but the entities cannot stay in their body if they're feeling significant pain, so that's how you force them out of someone. Presumably the energy patterns can be, corralled and contained with certain methods, but the exact specifics of that are interesting, to say the least. Now, that's another thing about this, though, is that the planet Mabu is actually someplace that is more or less Federation territory. I say more or less because, well, what we know about it indicates that the Federation doesn't go there very often. It's been 200 years since any planet or starship came to this planet. And the last one that came there crashed and didn't get recovered. So I would surmise that this is not a particularly popular solar system for anyone to visit, because seemingly the most interesting thing is this moon of a gas giant that has endless, intense electromagnetic storms. So, no valuable mining things or stuff like that. Or, it is actually also possible that Mabu 6 is the only planet that's actually dangerous. The rest of them are fine, and as long as you stay away from this habitable sort of moon of Mabu 6, you're never going to have any issues because of the fact that the disembodied entities are stuck there. Yeah. One thing we learn is that they can't just drift off into space. They need to use a starship to leave the moon. Otherwise, they're unable to leave. Now, one thing about this that I personally find to be an interesting question, and something that I was kind of alluding to earlier, is that the beings who use this form of imprisonment, are they really intending for this to be eternal suffering? Or was it meant to be temporary, like you're going to suffer for several months while your consciousness slowly disintegrates? And that brings up another interesting point. Why were the beings sent there to be imprisoned? Well, let's take a look over the Uxmal entity entry and see if there's any useful data. One, we know that hundreds of criminals had been sentenced to Mabu 6 with this method of imprisonment. We don't have particularly strong information about what their crimes were. However, the bits we do know is that they seem to be very callous and not nice people, let's put it that way. And they, again, we don't get enough background information on them to actually get a feel of who they are as people, other than bad guys. And at the same time, we don't know uh, much of anything about the people who sentenced them, other than the fact that this is a particularly sadistic method of imprisonment, because of the fact that the electromagnetic storms on that moon, while they're very dangerous to starships and various forms of technology, also cause the entities that are trapped there pain. Like, it's physically painful just to be there, yet at the same time, they're unable to die. And that, I'm not certain if that's the way things are meant to work. Because it's entirely possible that whoever came up with this method of punishment was actually intending for it to be um, a lot more temporary than it actually was. But, you know, it ended up being something that lasts for centuries. Now, this brings us around to the final thing I find interesting to ponder. Who the heck did this? What civilization was doing this? All we know is that these guys came from the Uxmal star system. That is literally the only thing we know. What bits of information we gleaned from the three who were nicknamed Slash, Buzz, and Slugger. Slash, Buzz, and Slugger acted like people who were formerly humanoids before being turned into disembodied spirits. And when they took over the host bodies, that's how they acted. They were actually able to convincingly act like humanoids. But they're, insane, psychotic human entities who really just, yeah, no, they were not uh, going to have a good day. So, what could you do with this in a TTRPG? One thing that might be interesting is to explore the nature of Uxmal society. This is something where you would have to spend a lot of time and effort developing your own ideas for who they were, why they did things, because those are giant unanswered questions. It's like, at no point do we see what an Uxmal looks like in their corporeal form. The only Uxmal we see are seen as disembodied spirits. Also, we really have no idea what the Uxmal have done with this technology other than turning condemned prisoners into disembodied spirits. Is this something the Uxmal have used for more legitimate purposes in their daily lives? Because, you know, this fits into the whole like sci-fi idea of mind transfer, because here we have three people who have had their bodies hijacked. Now, if it was a cloned body that didn't already have a mind of its own, hijacking it would be no big deal, and you could just like wander around in your new cloned body and basically do whatever you wanted. Which makes me question if maybe possibly Uxmal society had developed some sort of cultural insanity, where as a society they'd come to see certain things that people live with in real world daily life as inconveniences that were beneath them, thus treating certain parts of daily life that in real world terms as, well, things that aren't part of their lives. And that is a very scary thought. And it's also something where at no point in any of these Star Trek series have we actually seen an alien race that fits that description. And that's a very interesting thing to ponder when trying to use this as a plot device in a show. Because, one, the Uxmal civilization was depositing these prisoners in a location that is in a different solar system than the one they live in. So it is a race that is capable of warp speed travel, presumably. I mean, at the very least, interstellar travel, whether it's warp speed or not, it's probably warp speed. It doesn't necessarily mean they have good spaceships. However, it does mean that they have certain kinds of technology that the Federation, well, let's just say that the Federation knows these kinds of technology exist. They're not things that the Federation actually uses in daily life, but it's exotic technology that the Federation has seen in the past. However, in this episode, we don't actually see the methodology used to turn people into disembodied spirits. Pondering and reinventing that part of the episode is something that you could have a lot of fun with if you're going to use this in a TTRPG. Because, like I said before, we don't know much of anything about Uxmal society. We don't know who these people were before they got condemned to eternal suffering. We don't even know if the people who condemned them to eternal suffering actually knew that they were going to be, suffering for that long. And we've never seen Uxmal society. And looking into all of that stuff, that is fertile ground to have a whole lot of fun. And with that, I will bid you see you later.